My friend betrayed me for money, said it's just business. I stayed quiet. Now I'm rich and he's broke. Payback's a blast. I'd never expected my oldest friend to betray me. Dean and I went way back, to middle school days when we'd bond over late-night video games and inside jokes nobody else understood. We had been through everything together, crushes, fights, big dreams. But nothing could have prepared me for what he'd end up doing. It's the kind of betrayal you never see coming until it's staring you in the face. We'd both made our way to Chicago after college. I was trying to get my tech consulting business off the ground, mostly just scraping by with small contracts to help local businesses get online. Dean, on the other hand, was the one with big ideas, always talking about the hustle and how he was going to make it huge in real estate. He'd saved enough to put a down payment on a beat-up duplex on the south side, and I believed in him enough to throw in a chunk of my own savings when he asked for a loan. "Ollie, man, you know me," he'd said, leaning across the table, eyes gleaming with excitement. "You'll be the first person I pay back. I'm telling you, you're gonna look back on this and thank me." I shrugged, a little hesitant. "Dean, it's a lot of money. I don't have that much to spare, you know?" He waved me off, laughing. "Come on, Ollie. It's me. I'll pay you back double. Hell, maybe even triple. Just you wait. I'll have this place flipped and sold in 3 months." "All right," I said, still unsure but wanting to support him. "Just don't forget about it, okay? It's all I've got saved." "Don't worry, buddy. This is just the beginning," he grinned, clapping me on the back. But 3 months came and went. Then 6 months. Dean was barely making enough to keep up with the repairs on the place. Every time I asked about the money, he had an excuse. "It's close, Ollie, I swear, I've got a buyer on the line, it's just that there's one more round of inspections. Or, I need to fix the plumbing first, and then I'm golden. Trust me." After a while, I stopped asking. I was getting tired of the same old story, and honestly, I didn't want to make things awkward. Dean had always been my friend, but something about his attitude was starting to feel off. I couldn't put my finger on it. One night, we were at this little dive bar, the Rusty Nail, over on Lincoln. It was our usual spot, dimly lit, with mismatched furniture and a bartender who always looked half asleep. I was nursing my whiskey, listening to Dean go on about how he just landed this big real estate lead from a mutual friend, Nikki. She was a realtor, sharp as a tack, and had passed him a client she couldn't handle. "Yeah, man, this guy's ready to buy, like, tomorrow. Once that closes, I'm set," Dean said, practically bouncing in his seat. "Good for you, Dean," I replied, a little more distantly than usual. He noticed and leaned in. "What's up, Ollie? You don't seem all that excited for me." I took a deep breath, hesitating. I don't know, man. I guess I just don't see why you needed that loan if everything's going so well." His face tightened, the charm dimming just a little. "Oh, come on. That loan was like a lifeline for me back then. You know that. It's not like I haven't been working my ass off." I held up a hand, trying to keep things calm. I know. But, Dean, it's been months. I could really use that money back now, you know?" He gave a dry chuckle. "Ollie, don't worry. I've got you. Just let me close this next deal, all right? You'll have your money back in no time. Just business, buddy. Just business." Something about the way he said that phrase, "just business," made my skin crawl. I finished my drink in silence, letting the words sink in. A couple of weeks went by, and one evening, my phone rang. It was Nikki, sounding more upset than I'd ever heard her. "Hey, Ollie. You heard what Dean did?" she started, voice tense. "What are you talking about?" There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "That lead I passed him? He went straight to my competitor with it. Sold my insider info for $5,000. I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're kidding." "Wish I was. I lost a $10,000 commission because of him." I gripped the phone tight, heart pounding. "Nikki, I had no idea. I'm so sorry." She sighed, her tone softening. "It's not your fault, Ollie. But I thought you should know. Watch your back around him." That night, I couldn't sleep. Images of our years of friendship kept flashing through my mind, alongside this new, uglier version of Dean. I kept thinking back to all the times I'd helped him, all the times he'd promised to pay me back, all the times he'd convinced me to trust him. And for what? So he could turn around and stab another friend in the back? The next day, I confronted him. He was on the stoop of the duplex, smoking a cigarette, looking worn out but defiant as ever. "Dean, we need to talk," I said, walking up to him. He glanced up, eyes wary. "What's up, Ollie?" I took a deep breath. "Why'd you do that to Nikki?" He shrugged, not even looking ashamed. "It's business, Ollie. She'd have done the same thing if she had the chance." "That's not true, and you know it." Look, man, it's a dog-eat-dog world. You can't trust anybody, alright? I did what I had to do to survive. Even if it meant screwing over a friend? He scoffed, taking another drag of his cigarette. Ollie, don't be naive. She was just another player in the game. There's no room for loyalty when money's on the line. I stared at him, feeling a pit of anger and betrayal boiling up inside me. Is that what I am to you, too? Just another player? He looked me dead in the eye. Honestly? Sometimes, yeah. That was it. The final nail in the coffin. I walked away, the weight of that betrayal settling heavily on my shoulders. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into my work, barely speaking to Dean, barely eating or sleeping. Then, just as I thought I'd hit rock bottom, I got a call from Rafi. He was an investor I'd met through a client in Milwaukee, sharp, intense, with a reputation for spotting potential where others didn't see it. We'd met a few times, and he'd been intrigued by my consulting gig. Ollie, I like your business. I think you've got something unique here, he said in that gruff, no-nonsense way of his. Thank you, Rafi, I replied, trying to keep my excitement in check. I'm serious. I'm prepared to invest in you. But here's the thing, you'll need to put in some capital yourself. Skin in the game, you know? I hesitated, my mind racing. That was the money Dean still owed me, the money he'd promised to pay back. Seeing my hesitation, Rafi continued. If you need some quick cash, I know people who might be interested in buying out any shares you've got in other ventures. Real estate, maybe? I froze, my mind clicking into place. Dean. The duplex. I hated the idea of screwing him over. But at the same time, he'd already made it clear how little I mattered to him. Tell me more, I said, my voice a little steadier than I felt. The next day, I approached Dean. He was in a terrible state, looking more worn out than ever, and I almost felt guilty for what I was about to do. Almost. Dean, I've been thinking about your offer to partner up, I said, voice neutral. His face lit up, a hint of the old charm creeping back. Yeah? About time, Ollie. We'd make a hell of a team. I forced a smile. Right. But here's the thing. I can't go into this unless you sell me your stake in the duplex. His smile faded, suspicion creeping into his eyes. Sell my stake? Ollie, that place is all I have. I shrugged, trying to keep my tone casual. You said you wanted to partner up, right? I can't do that unless I know I've got some security in this. He laughed, a little nervously. Come on, man. You're asking me to give up everything. For what? $5,000, I replied, barely able to keep the satisfaction out of my voice. $5,000? He spat, his face twisted in anger. Are you out of your mind? Take it or leave it, Dean, I said, my voice steady. He looked at me, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation. I could see him calculating, weighing his options. Finally, he gave a bitter laugh. Fine. You win, Ollie. You want it? It's yours. A month later, I had everything I needed to launch my business to the next level. I brought in 2 new employees, expanded my operations in Milwaukee, and watched as my little venture grew into something I'd never dreamed possible. Meanwhile, Dean spiraled, his 1-bedroom apartment getting smaller and smaller, his dreams slipping further and further away. One night, he called me, his voice barely a whisper. Ollie, man, I'm out. I've got nothing left. I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, or the ghost of friendship. But I pushed it aside, thinking back to everything he'd said, everything he'd done. Yeah, Dean. It's rough out there, I said simply, and hung up. I guess he was right. In the end, it was just business. A few months went by, and things were looking up. My consulting firm had gone from being a one-man hustle to a small, but respectable operation. I had clients on retainer, a solid team, and even talks with Rafi about further expansion into other cities. Life was good. Then, one evening, out of nowhere, I ran into Dean. I was at the local grocery store picking up a few things when I spotted him in the next aisle, hunched over a cart, looking more worn down than ever. He hadn't noticed me, and I could see why. His clothes looked like they hadn't been washed in days, his hair was unkempt, and he seemed like he'd aged 10 years. A pang of guilt hit me as I watched him shuffle through items on a clearance shelf, his gaze listless. Part of me wanted to turn around and walk away. But something pulled me toward him. Dean, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked up, and for a split second, I saw a flash of surprise, and maybe even relief, in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by something darker, something like resentment. Ollie, he replied, voice cold, guarded. An awkward silence stretched between us, the kind only possible when a long history is tangled up in bitterness and betrayal. How've you been? I finally asked, even though the answer was written all over him. He scoffed. How do you think? You got what you wanted, right? Bought me out, left me with nothing. I flinched, a mix of anger and regret bubbling up. You left yourself with nothing, Dean. You're the one who played dirty, remember? Nikki, me, your friends. We trusted you. His jaw clenched, and I could see he wanted to say something, maybe fight back, but he held his tongue. You wouldn't understand, he muttered, looking away. What wouldn't I understand, Dean? That you'd sell out people who had your back? That you'd choose money over friendship? Help me understand, because all I see is you doing whatever it took to line your own pockets. He turned to face me, his eyes blazing with anger and a hint of something else, regret, maybe? You think I had a choice? You think I didn't want to make something of myself, Ollie? You had your thing, you had it all figured out. I was just trying to keep my head above water. I let out a bitter laugh. No, Dean, you weren't trying to stay afloat. You were trying to take everyone down with you just so you wouldn't feel like a failure. The words hung heavy in the air between us. For a moment, I thought he might swing at me. But instead, he just stared at me, defeated. Well, congratulations, Ollie. You got what you wanted. Hope it was worth it, he said, voice barely a whisper before turning and walking away. I stood there, watching him go, a mixture of anger, sorrow, and guilt twisting in my chest. I told myself I shouldn't feel bad. He'd made his bed. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line, that in taking my revenge, I'd lost something too. Over the next year, I tried to put Dean out of my mind. My business continued to grow, and I even moved to a new, larger apartment in a nicer part of the city. But every now and then, I'd think back to that night in the grocery store, to the look in his eyes, and wonder if maybe I'd gone too far. Then, one morning, I got a call from Nikki. Hey, Ollie, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. I don't know if you heard, but it's about Dean. My stomach tightened. What happened? She sighed. He's in the hospital. Overdose. They found him in his apartment yesterday. He's not in good shape, Ollie. I felt like the ground had just fallen out from under me. Is he going to make it? They're not sure. But he doesn't have anyone else. I thought you should know. I thanked her and hung up, the words echoing in my mind. Overdose. Dean was never one for hard drugs. Drinking, sure, but this? It didn't sound like him. Or maybe I just didn't know him anymore. Maybe I'd never really known him. After a long, restless night, I found myself at the hospital, sitting in a cold, sterile waiting room, feeling like I'd stepped into a nightmare. I hadn't seen Dean in over a year, but now I was here, waiting for any news on whether he'd pull through. Eventually, a nurse came over. Are you here for Mr. Mercer? I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. He's stable, but he's still weak. He's been asking for someone named Ollie. A strange mixture of relief and dread washed over me as I followed her to his room. When I stepped inside, I barely recognized him. Dean lay on the bed, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes and an M4 hooked up to his arm. He looked like a shadow of the friend I'd once known. Hey, I said softly, pulling a chair up beside his bed. He turned his head slowly, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Ollie, he whispered, his voice raspy. Yeah, it's me, I replied, forcing a smile. You look like hell, man. He let out a weak chuckle. Guess I deserve that. Silence fell between us, the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on us both. Finally, Dean spoke, his voice barely a whisper. Ollie. I messed up. I know I did. I nodded, feeling a pang of sadness. Yeah, you did. But we both did, Dean. I wasn't exactly innocent, either. He looked away, his eyes glassy. I wanted so badly to make it, you know? To prove that I could be somebody. And I ended up hurting the only people who ever gave a damn about me. I swallowed hard, the pain in his voice cutting through me. You didn't have to do it alone, Dean. We were there for you, but you kept pushing us away. He closed his eyes, a tear slipping down his cheek. I know that now. I was just so scared of failing, of being a nobody. I reached over, placing a hand on his shoulder. You weren't a nobody, Dean. Not to me. Not to Nikki. We cared about you, man. We still do. For the first time in a long time, Dean looked at me with something like the old Dean, the one I'd known before money and ambition had twisted him into someone else. I don't deserve forgiveness, Ollie. But I just want you to know, I'm sorry. For everything. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of anger and betrayal starting to lift. I know you are, Dean. And I'm sorry, too. I didn't have to go so hard on you. I wanted payback, and maybe I got carried away. He nodded, eyes wet. Maybe we can start over? I managed a small smile, despite the tears pricking at my own eyes. Yeah, Dean. I think we can try. Dean made it through his recovery, and though things were never quite the same, we found a way to move forward. He stayed out of real estate, got a steady job managing a small bookstore downtown, and slowly, piece by piece, rebuilt his life. I kept working on my business, but I never forgot the lessons I'd learned through that painful journey. Sometimes, we'd meet for coffee, catch a game, or just walk around the city, both of us a little older, a little wiser. We didn't talk much about the past, some things were better left buried, but we found a new kind of friendship, one built on hard-earned trust and forgiveness. And every now and then, when the guilt or resentment would flare up, I'd remind myself that, in the end, we both survived. We both found a way to let go, to rebuild, to forgive. Looking back now, I can see that neither of us was innocent. We were both driven by pride, fear, and ambition, and it nearly destroyed us. But somehow, through it all, we found our way back to something real, something worth saving. And maybe, in the end, that's all we ever needed.